The Trump administration's recent executive order on immigration has started a great deal of controversy. Media backlash and protests have claimed that this is either a Muslim ban or a ban on refugees. A lot of these claims seem to be more opinions of opinions rather than dealing with the particulars of the executive order itself. Since the executive order is short at only 11 sections, I thought I'd go through the four main claims of the executive order and analyze the actual negative effects it has in a value-free way. The first claim the executive order makes a ban on immigration for 90 days from countries of concern. The 7 countries that are listed are Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, and Libya. None of these are explicitly stated in the executive order itself, but a Department of Homeland Security fact sheet came out later listing these 7 countries. The choice of these 7 countries comes from the fact that the Obama administration last year passed a list of countries of concern listing these 7 as countries where if an immigrant has visited these countries before coming to the United States, their visa waiver eligibility would be denied. Now it has moved away from just a visa-free access to a wholesale ban for 90 days on these countries, for both non-immigrants and immigrants alike. It would be incorrect to characterize this as a Muslim ban, since of the 215 million people that live in these 7 countries, approximately 80 to 90% are Muslim, meaning 40-something million non-Muslims are banned and approximately 160 million Muslims are banned. That'd be 10% of the global Muslim population and a significant amount of non-Muslims as well. It'd be similar to saying that a war on Utah would be a war on Mormons. Since that is a factually inaccurate claim, it is more important to talk about the actual negative effects that banning a significant amount of people has, rather than claiming it is a religious or racially motivated claim. The second claim of the executive order is a 120-day halt on refugee applications to the United States so that they can increase the refugee screening procedures that the U.S. has. This, first of all, seems like a naive move, since the refugee screening procedures in the U.S. are extremely stringent, with it taking 2 years to process the average refugee. And the claims of the refugee revisitation of the criteria seem to also create more barriers to entry that don't seem to increase the actual security towards the United States. Some of the claims of the refugee part of the bill include a permanent halt on access for Syrian refugees to the United States, except on a case-by-case basis, and a prioritization of minority ethnic groups. What it means by minority ethnic and religious groups is hard to see. If it classifies Sunni as the majority religion in most of these areas, then it doesn't actually change who the minorities facing persecution are, as a lot of minority Muslim sects are also facing persecution. However, if it just says Muslims are the majority, then the minority groups include Yazidis, Druze, and Christians, all of whom are experiencing great deals of genocidal fears, but who not necessarily represent the majority of people suffering in these areas. Another stipulation is to reduce the amount of intake towards the United States of refugees from 85,000 a year from last year to 50,000 a year from this year on. It is not a significant decrease, but it does make a difference considering the United States' ability to screen and vet these refugees and ensure that they are provided safe and secure homes. The later parts of the bill include a visa reciprocity agreement, which means that if a country has more stringent requirements for U.S. immigration than the U.S. has for them, it would raise the fees and immigration requirements for that nation, and an increase on security on the border, which would include biometric checks and other more intense screening procedures, including interviews, which would really slow down the process of bringing immigrants into the U.S. This proposes a lot of legitimate fears for the U.S., especially in its business interests. If it really slows down and intimidates people from accessing the U.S. or coming there to work, it means that there's a skills shortage coming in. And a lot of high-tech firms, such as in Silicon Valley, really depend on high-skilled labor from immigrant nations to prop up their productivity. By slowing down the procedures, even if it's not an outright ban for other countries, it does mean that the access to new workers is much harder than it was before, which would reduce their overall ability to hire who they need. Similarly, there is a hypocrisy in the bill. If the concern was about domestic terrorism, the conclusion of countries like Iran would make no sense. Iranian citizens have been responsible for 0 acts of domestic terrorism within the United States, but Saudi Arabia, who is exempt from the immigration ban, has contributed to 78% of the citizens who have committed domestic terrorist acts within America. This would mean that this is far more concerned with geopolitics, siding with Saudi Arabia in a tense geopolitical situation in the Middle East, propping up American interests as keeping them the regional power over an increasingly aggressive Iran. These geopolitical interests abroad, however, do not represent the homeland security interests of the states at home. So it's a mischaracterization of the bill to show that what the bill is intended to do. At the same time, the effects of this bill would be increased tension, especially in conflict zones such as Yemen and Syria, where Iran and Saudi Arabia are fighting proxy wars. By picking a side, it's only likely to increase the bloodshed that occurs in these areas. Another thing, though, is that a lot of the information given out by media outlets about this immigration bill don't represent it as these things. It doesn't talk about the geopolitical interests of the US or the hypocrisy of the bill, and it doesn't talk about the harm to businesses. A lot of these claims have to do with the fact that Muslims are being banned, or the fact that refugees aren't as likely to commit domestic terrorism incidents. However, this doesn't really represent the reality of the issue. One statistic that the Financial Times published said that it's more likely that you'll get struck by lightning than die in a terrorist attack. However, this doesn't represent what the security concern is. It's not the likelihood of all 300 million Americans who would die in a terrorist attack. It's actually the likelihood that a new immigrant would commit a terrorist attack, which is significantly higher than the overall likelihood, which is an average as opposed to a specific instance. By using statistical misinformation to make your case seem much stronger to you, it doesn't actually represent an adequate case of what to do in the future. By demonizing the Trump administration as purely bad and saying that one is purely good, one doesn't look at the realities of the situations. This is an unprecedented act. Jimmy Carter canceled visas to Iranian citizens in 1980, and in 2011, the Obama administration banned Iraqi refugees from entering the United States. By targeting the Trump administration as some unique form of evil, it obscures the actual harms that this bill brings about, and those are far more important in making a convincing argument. By making your argument based on misinformation, by dismissing that misinformation, it makes it seem like the opposite is true and that the bill is effective, which it clearly isn't. One of the positives, however, that can come out of this is that the amount of protests and backlash towards the Trump administration represents an accountability towards the executive that have been lacking in the last 8 years. By holding the Trump administration accountable for things that even previous administrations did, it means that people will outcry against the abuses of the American government, which is always a positive in fighting for a more transparent and open administration.